I have made a minor mistake, as all humans do at this point in their lives. My last video, well, not the last one, but my last game update video that I had spoken with you guys about, I had gone over the Rogue after the Paladin. And ironically enough, though it has become one of my favorite classes, I completely forgot about the Ranger, and I thought that Rogue came before Ranger for whatever reason. Alphabet is hard, you know? So we're going to do that now. And I'm going to go in a little bit more depth with this one to kind of make up for that little mistake. So, the Ranger. The premier, quote-unquote, bad, useless class, according to Reddit and 5e brain rotters is what I like to call them, where they think 5e is the best game ever, there's nothing wrong with it, which is blatantly not true. But regardless, how am I planning on fixing the Ranger as it stands now? Also, apologies if you can hear the fan, or if I seem a little bit less energetic today. I just got back in town from a funeral, and I'm very exhausted, and it's also extremely hot, so I'm just trying to get this out for you guys. So what do I do? What do I think the Ranger needs to be? Well, it's a tricky question because half-casters really don't fill the niche of the Spellblade or the weapon-using spellcaster that uses both a combination of their weapon prowess and spellcasting abilities, or as most people would call them, the Gish. And though most people will say that the Gish is technically arcane, I kind of classify any sort of class structure that is melee weapon or any sort of weapon focus where it's 50-50 of weapon focus and spellcasting focus as a sort of Gish. Which means Cleric could also fall into this category. But regardless, the Ranger, I don't think, fits the Gish archetype very well. For a very simple reason. And it's that Rangers are, at least historically, supposed to be these expert navigators, trackers, and combatants of different forms. But that's kind of taken up by the Fighter, as the Fighter is the standard player class that you choose whenever you want to be good at weapons. And being good at weapons is kind of the only thing the Fighter has in 5th edition. And even then, its entire shtick kind of gets taken when multiclassing is a factor, since any class can just take a level into Fighter and be just as proficient, if not slightly less so, than the Fighter at doing Fighter things, based solely on how poor the multiclassing mechanic was implemented. So, with this knowledge of Gish archetypes not really working very well in 5th edition, mechanically speaking, except for things like maybe Hexblade Warlock and Bladesinger Wizard are like two that come to my mind. Maybe like some Cleric subclasses could go in there, maybe Forge Domain, but they don't really work. So they don't work. The multiclassing rule kind of breaks everything. And the fact that the only, at least in my opinion, the only reason that the Ranger is good is based solely on the spell list that it has access to being the Druid spell list. And with the advent of archery, the fighting style, and conjure animals, things like web and hypnotic pattern and all such really powerful spells, really most of the Ranger's power isn't in the class itself, it's what the class has access to, and it is nothing wholly unique to the Ranger. A Fighter can be just as effective at ranged combat as a Ranger can, but the Ranger has the benefit of the spells that help facilitate that ranged playstyle, and a Druid has more spells they can choose from and sometimes better spells than the ranger, but with the advent of getting the ability to use martial abilities as well is a big help in that department. So it's one of the best half-casters. But in earlier editions, it was more of the long-range specialist. It was the long-range striker. In 4th edition, it was ranged combat with the rogue as well. Or the rogue either specialized in light-bladed weapons or off-handed weapons, and the ranger specifically dealt with bow-type weapons or crossbow-type weapons. So how do I plan on making the ranger in my system feel better? Well, a lot of their roleplay heavy abilities like favorite terrain, favorite foe, stuff like that, I don't think are necessary but should be encouraged to be used in a unique sense that 4th edition used, where you could take a feat if you have proficiency in a skill and then you gain benefits from that. So for things like favorite foe, I'd probably put that under like investigation, maybe history, to know what the creatures are like. And for favorite terrain, it'd be things like nature or survival. And if you have proficiency in that skill, you can take this feat, and the feat grants you the ability, and thus, since you're getting more feats, it doesn't really hinder you all that much in terms of your power. In terms of their capstones, the capstone's just kind of really, really bad. So I'm going to be changing that. Not sure to what exactly yet. And much like every other class that I have spoken to before, they are going to be getting maneuvers. Of course they will, because that's what you do when you lack content. Basically, the ranger's going to have most of their spellcasting removed in favor of maneuvers, and they're basically going to become a full martial class with spell-like abilities, and they're going to have their own thing. And I'm also going to bring back the Ranger's Quarry, which was basically their version of Hunter's Mark in 4th edition, where you pick a guy and you get to deal more damage to them pretty much for the entire combat. And it was really good, because that's what all strikers had. They all had an ability similar to this. Rogues had sneak attack, rangers had their Ranger's Quarry, warlocks had their warlock cursing, stuff like that. So I think that is a really good way to not only boost the ranger's damage, but make them more consistent in terms of damage output without relying on things like conjure animals to help aid in that damage, or using bad spells like Hunter's Mark. They're also going to be restricted to ranged weapons. That's going to be something. They're going to be ranged weapons specific as a baseline class. However, with the advent of the tier system, since you're going to be able to choose basically your subclass, for lack of a better term, at level 1, you get to pick your subclass, but in this case it's called the Intrepid path, or the Intrepid tier. Since you get to pick your Intrepid portion, like your Intrepid tier ability, there will be one that allows you to take things like, you can use, instead of using ranged weapons, anything that references ranged weapons can now also be used with things like short swords, or anything that has the light property. Stuff like that. There'll also be one that will allow you to do other things. What those other things are at this very moment are unclear, but basically there's going to be a facilitation of different playstyles for the striker version of this ranger, and all of their maneuvers are going to be based around either simple ranged weapon attacks, or something like how 4E does it, where it's bursts or blasts. And so the ranger is going to become much more of a nuker. They're going to become much more high damage, but at a range. And with that, I should also say that ranged weapons are getting a nerf in the range department, so that kiting isn't as easy. And so their range is going to be reduced by a significant margin to facilitate the need for ranged characters to be somewhat closer to the action without being so far away from said action that nobody can reasonably get to them without having like 4 actions to do so. Or having some form of DM bullshit of, well, I can teleport 500 feet in a turn and it provokes no attack of opportunity and I just teleport anywhere I want even if I can't see it, so haha, screw you. And so with them being closer, it makes their position a lot more relevant to the situation. That also comes with the change to the movement system, which I will get into in a later video once I'm done with all the classes. And with that advent, they will be, like I said, they'll be losing a lot of their spellcasting ability and a lot of their spells, but it'll be replaced by maneuvers. And all of the subclasses, as of this moment, as I am no longer tied down to the mechanics of 5th edition due to some stuff happening in my personal life, they will now basically no longer exist and will have sort of like a modular skill tree system where at different tiers of play you can pick features from a subclass as long as you meet certain prerequisites. So you can essentially take the first ability of 4 different subclasses and not be really good at any of them if you had specialized into them, but you'll have the benefits of all of them. Or you can spec into one all the way through and be insanely good at that one thing. Or you can spec somewhat okay into one and then get the base form of 2 other subclasses to kind of mix and match how you want to build your character. So, I think it's going to be very interesting. And with that knowledge of what the Ranger is going to become, where it's going to be mostly weapon-based with some spell-like abilities like the Fighter will, what is going to be their central resource for this? I think it's going to be similar to, not the Monk, in the sense of that it's going to be able to swap between 2 pools and you never truly run out of something. I think it's going to be something more akin to, like, the connection with the earth. So, like, not herbalism, but spirituality or communing with the nature. And then you'll have a certain amount of this resource that you can expend. And then over the course of a short rest, you can regain an amount of it. And then on a long rest, you regain all of it. And this kind of helps with the martial playstyle that you have a pool, and the pool gets smaller as you go along, but every time you take a short rest, you only gain a certain amount back. So there's still a sense of you have to wonder what kind of abilities you want to use at a certain time, but it isn't so punishing to the point that you don't want to use certain abilities because you're afraid that you're not going to have any more resources for the rest of the crawl, the combat encounters for the day, as you'll always at least have some. So it facilitates, at least to me, in my eyes, a more steadily paced damage output of abilities, where the Ranger is incentivized not to just dump everything that they have into a single combat encounter, but to instead stagger their use of certain strong abilities and mainly rely on slightly weaker and more prevalent abilities that they could use frequently. But yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do with the Ranger. Next one is Sorcerer. Stick around for that one. And then once this series is over, I'm going to let you guys know what I'm doing with the basic rules. See what that's like. Latest.